Welcome to Pharmacist Diaries. One of you asked for me back, so here I am, just for you. Come on, this is a serious podcast, Sanjay. Today's guest is Michael Alexander. He's a pharmacist turned entrepreneur who has a fascinating journey that spanned across multiple continents. We'll dive deep into Michael's experiences in pharmacy, his transition into business ownership, and his unique viewpoints on the role of technology within the pharmacy industry. So sit back, relax, and get ready for a really inspiring conversation.
Welcome to Pharmacist Diaries, Michael. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast, and I'm so excited about this new friendship that we've developed and a new connection. Before we dive into this episode, tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey into pharmacy.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Well, I'll start, with my background. First of all, I'll have to say that I have spent over 20 years of my life in Australia, but I was not able to shake my American accent. But I do consider myself a true blue Aussie, having lived more than half my life in Australia. So I grew up in Los Angeles, California, but moved to Australia when I was about 14 years of age and lived there for the next 20 odd years. I received my pharmacy degree from the University of Queensland way back in 1998, which seems like a long time ago, and practiced pharmacy in Australia, mostly, if not all, community pharmacy. And I remember coming out of university, I tried to get a hospital pharmacy internship because that seemed to be the gold standard. And all the interns wanted to be in hospital. It just seemed a little bit more clinical, a little bit more doing what you were trained to do. But I couldn't get a job in hospital pharmacy, and I ended up in community pharmacy. And funny enough, it was exactly the right place for me to be because I loved the interaction. I loved patients, seeing the same patients over and over again. And I really, really enjoyed it for many years. And I ended up buying into my first pharmacy in 2005, which was a small Amcal brand in Australia in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, which I did for a few years, and which was I don't know if total disaster is the word, but it was not successful. I'm happy to dive into that if you want to reopen old wounds. But it was definitely a learning experience. And I exited that business a few years later before re-entering ownership in 2012, where I was one of the founding members of a pharmacy group that had a number of pharmacies in Sydney, Brisbane, and Adelaide. And I ended up co-owning 4 pharmacies myself, Terry White, which is now Terry White Kenmart in Australia, and Priceline brands. And I did that for a number of years. At the same time, I went to grad school. I achieved my Master's of Management, my MBA from Macquarie University. And by 2014-ish, I sort of had enough of community pharmacy. I decided I wanted to try something else. And ultimately, I left the country, moving back to the States at that time. I worked as a management consultant in the dental industry, of all things, when I first came back to the States, before joining CVS Health, which is the largest retail pharmacy chain in the country, doing product development for their retail pharmacy network. I then shifted to health insurance, to Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is the largest health insurance network in the U.S., doing product development again, particularly in digital and telehealth-based products. And eventually I moved to my current role, which is fully into digital health and the startup arena, when I joined Omada Health, where I'm currently a regional vice president of health plan sales. So that's kind of my journey, my occupational journey. A little over 4 years ago, I co-founded a communication startup called Audirie with a good friend of mine, Peter Cladius, who's an actual Aussie with an Aussie accent, based in Sydney. And I'm currently a co-CEO with Peter of that enterprise as well.
Oh, we have lots to get into for this episode. This is exciting. Let me take you back to when you were a teenager. Like me, you moved countries. How was that for you?
Hey guys, before we get into this week's episode, I really want to remind you about the discount code that I have for thenakedpharmacy.com. As my listeners or viewers of the podcast, you'll receive a 20% discount using the code PD20. Both myself, my husband, and my children are using the products and we're absolutely loving them. I really want to advocate for this brand because number one, it's owned and created by a pharmacist, Kevin Levers. He has over 35 years of experience working in the industry of natural medicines and has created his own company and provided us with so many different products to support our needs. For me personally, I absolutely love their gut health products, the magnesium for my sleep, and Saffrosun Energy. Because as a mum of two very young children, working full-time and juggling the day-to-day life that I have, I really need that extra support to keep me energized and going throughout the day. I also wanted to let you know that if you're not sure where to start with your supplement regime, Kevin has a team of multiple pharmacists that you can either contact by phone, email, or on social media to get some support on where to get started. Check out their website, thenakedpharmacy.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
It was rough, and I would love to hear a little bit about what you think, but it's interesting because my parents are immigrants. I believe your parents are also immigrants. So they have this immigrant journey where they have to go to a new country and it's a new language, a new culture. We sort of did the same in terms of, because I know you moved at pretty much the same age from the UK to America. It's not quite the same because the language is the same, right? We speak the language, but there's still that cultural difference that can be quite extreme. And especially at that age, which is a very formative age, 14, 15 years old, when you're still trying to understand yourself and your place in the world, it can be quite challenging to then try to and immerse yourself and understand a new culture. So it took me a number of years before I really felt comfortable. I don't think I ever felt completely comfortable. I always felt like a little bit of a fish out of water. I don't know your experience, but I was constantly being asked, "Oh, where are you from?" Right? And that's nice. I mean, it's polite. It's a polite thing to do, but it also reminds you that you're not from there, that you're kind of a foreigner in a foreign land. And so it really got to a point. Eventually, I felt comfortable in the new environment, but I always felt like, hey, I'm American. America's my home. That's where I want to get to, and eventually went back. So I'm curious to. I mean, I know you're interviewing me, but I'm curious if you felt the same way in your journey as a teenager.
You couldn't have described it any better. That's exactly how I felt. I really struggled with my transition. I think when my parents, obviously, when they had children and they made this decision to move countries and try and create a better life for us all, everything from the lifestyle to the quality of your home that you would get and how far your money would go, from the education that's available, the opportunities for the children. They had the best of intentions, but I think what they didn't get right was the communication in explaining to us why they were doing the things that they were doing. And I've had this discussion with my mum, and in hindsight, she also has reflected that they did go about it the wrong way, because even though I was 14, 15 and nearing adulthood, I was still pretty much treated like a child. So you're making this huge decision to move countries without including your children in the journey. You're making those decisions for your family and thinking and doing what's best for your family without really truly understanding how your child is going to experience a change. And like you said, it was at one of the most influential times of your life. You're 14, 15 years old, you're going through puberty, there's a lot of emotional changes, hormonal changes, physical changes, you're learning who you are, and you have to uproot yourself and live in a new country, a new city, a new home, make new friends. What I found really hard about the American culture, and I think where I lived specifically, and this is, I guess, only my experience, is that I lived in Richmond, Virginia, and most of the children were raised in Richmond. So they went to elementary school together, middle school together, and then high school together. So everyone knew each other really, really well. Those friendships and little cliques of, friendships had already developed from a very young age. So I came into sophomore year, which was even harder than coming in freshman year. I think if I'd come in freshman year, it would have been easier because everyone was new to high school. So I may have immersed into the environment a little bit faster. But the curriculum with the school is completely different. How the school runs is completely different. What subjects you do are completely different. The school was 1,600 students, where I came from a school of maybe 300 max. Um, it was all girls, and then I was mixed into boys and girls. No uniform was a big thing. It was a very open space in terms of an open campus. So it was such a huge school to navigate where to go. I used to get lost quite a lot. At that time, like you said, with the culture, people really didn't understand where I was from. So my dad comes from Kenya, my mum comes from Uganda. We are Indian in origin. We live in England, and now we've moved to the US. So they were very confused. Most people didn't know at that time where England was. And then when you try to inform them that your skin color and your culture is Indian, they automatically used to say things like, is it American Indian? Have you been living in a teepee before coming to school with us? And they really didn't understand I've come from another country. A lot of people that I went to school with don't have passports and have never left the US. So their understanding of the world and international living was very small compared to my experience. So I found that really, really hard. And there was a lot of racism as well in the school that I went to. We had multiple cafeterias at the school, but they were segregated by groups. So you would have your footballers and cheerleaders in one cafeteria, and obviously the culture, or where I went to school, that would be a lot of Caucasian or white teenagers. There was one cafeteria which would have Blacks and Hispanics. And if you walked into that cafeteria, you felt like everyone was turning around and looking at you and staring at you like, why are you in here? This is not the place for you. Remove yourself, which was really scary. I was very timid back then. And that was a really difficult transition for me. And then the third cafeteria was everyone else. You had skateboarders and, artsy kind of characters, musicians, people who didn't really fit into a specific group, but you had to fit in a group. This was the most annoying bit. You had to fit into a group. I didn't understand this. Why could everyone not be friends? This was really hard for me. Why was it really difficult for me to find people to connect with and become friends with? Why did I have to be a specific type of character or enjoy cheerleading or be really good at sports or be really good at music to fit into certain groups? That was really tough for me. And I didn't experience that in the UK. We were pretty much, it was very open and friendly. Of course, racism exists in the UK. But when it came to school, I think we were raised in a culture where you were expected to be friendly with everyone around you, and you actually go above and beyond for new people who enter the school. And that was a massive part of the culture, especially in a smaller environment. But here it was really, really hard. And that really changed who I was. And I became a very different person to maybe where I was raised, and I rebelled a lot against my parents at that time because I was so maybe frustrated and unhappy having changed environments. However, when I look back at that scenario today, I can walk into any situation, any environment, and adapt and be flexible with ease. And that experience has made me such a strong, resilient character. And I definitely would not be who I am today without that experience.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree. And by the way, the fact that the kids didn't know where the UK was is kind of an indictment on the US educational system, but we won't talk about that. That's for another podcast. But I totally agree that on the flip side, there are some benefits. And you talked about adaptability. And for me, the way I think about it is you almost become a student of human nature because you are very sensitive to the way people interact with you, how you're interacting with them. You kind of, in my case, I became more of a people pleaser where, I was trying to understand what does this person want to hear and how can I be part of their clique, or at least seem to be part of their clique. How are they talking? How are they moving? What do they care about? Can I start to talk in that way? And now I'm being accepted into that particular environment, which again has its pluses and minuses, right? And in some cases, that's good because you become adaptable, you become kind of a chameleon in a sense. But in another way, it's tough because all of a sudden you think, well, what do I like, right? I'm here trying to please other people. I'm trying to be part of this new environment. I'm kind of losing a sense of myself and what I really like and what I care about. And it took me many years personally to kind of figure that out. Interestingly enough, because I spent such a long time trying to assimilate into a new environment. I'm wondering, does that resonate with you?
Oh man, it resonates with me too much. It's bringing back the days of what I did to fit in. I started wearing Abercrombie and Fitch. I listened to Dave Matthews Band. I had an American accent for several years because all I wanted to do was be accepted by society. And I did whatever the popular kids were doing. And I didn't really discover who I was. I just tried to become a version of what I thought society wanted me to be. And like you said, it's taken me a long time to break free of that character and understand more of who I am and learning that it's okay to be whoever you want to be. And yeah, it was really tough. When I went to college in the US, I felt that it was a lot easier because you were mixing with so many new people who you'd never met before, and everyone was going through the same experience as you. So it became a lot easier for me to make friendships because in freshman year, everyone was in the same environment. But also, I felt that by the time we got to the age of 18, people were more open minded to culture differences. Things were molding in terms of as years were going by, people were becoming more aware of different ethnicities, different cultural backgrounds, the way you speak, what you like, accepting that you don't have to fit into certain molds. But also, there was so much more available to you as a college student compared to the small environment of a school. But even then, I still did what I had to do to be accepted into society, and I really still struggle with that. And it was only until I came back to the UK and started pharmacy where I probably made more decisions for myself. And maybe I felt more comfortable, and I naturally reverted to making decisions for me and doing things that I wanted to do rather than trying to mold into what other people expected of me.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think exactly the same for me. It was not until I got into pharmacy that I started to kind of really understand. All right, I'm in a position of authority here. I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable. I'm starting to connect with patients. One another benefit is you're able to connect with patients pretty quickly because you're able to read people. You're just used to reading people very quickly to get a sense of how can I be accepted by them, and that's great in healthcare because it allows you to have a level of bedside manner, which maybe other pharmacists, other healthcare professionals who are raised in their own environment, they've never really felt the need to reach out and connect with somebody if it wasn't within their own kind of space or they're not part of their own kind of thinking. So I felt that was a real benefit, frankly, in pharmacy and in healthcare.
Yeah, and even when I look at this podcast now, I don't think I would feel as comfortable reaching out to people that I don't know in the US if I hadn't have already lived there and understood your environment, what pharmacy's like there, what it's like in terms of quality of life, the stress that pharmacists go through, and the general culture. And I know personally that actually Americans are really friendly. I've experienced some really amazing connections with people. And even starting this podcast and going onto LinkedIn and reaching out to my fellow American pharmacists has been so easy for me. And I definitely don't think I would feel as comfortable or confident doing that if I hadn't have lived there already, because you automatically have that connection. You've lived there before, and you just say that, hey, I'm a Virginia Tech Hokie. That makes sense to people. I studied in the US, I lived in the US. I used to live in Virginia. You automatically have a conversation. You automatically have something in common that you can talk about, which makes it easier to then build those friendships. But yeah, it is really tough moving countries, but it has done wonders for my character and my personality today. When you lived in Australia and you were going through pharmacy school, tell me a little bit about what your journey was like as a student. What were the aspects of the course that you loved that helped you to, I guess, set yourself up for community pharmacy?
It's a loaded question because I didn't love the course, frankly.
Okay,
I
that's
was
okay.
sorry, everybody, showing my true colors here. It was interesting because I never really wanted to be a pharmacist. It was my parents who thought this would be a great career, and my father in particular. His brother owned a pharmacy in Egypt, where my father was born and raised. And in a lot of countries, especially kind of the Middle Eastern countries, pharmacists are held in very high esteem, even higher than doctors a lot of the time because people don't get to see doctors. It's expensive for them. The main health professional that people see is a pharmacist. And so it's a very lucrative career in those countries, and it's also one that's held in high esteem. So he saw that firsthand with his brother. He used to work in his brother's pharmacy. And ever since I could remember when I was a kid, when someone would ask me, oh, what are you going to be when you grow up? My father would jump in and say, well, he's going to be a pharmacist. And so that was kind of written in the stars since I was a kid. So I went to pharmacy school and didn't really enjoy it. I didn't really care about medications and how medications worked, and didn't really interest me that much. I kind of did as much as I should, enough to get by. Spent a lot of time doing other things not related academically. I would go into other courses and just to kind of see what, very much like humanities types of courses. So I would go to law lectures, and I would go to creative writing lectures because that interested me a lot more than what I was doing, and still got by at the end. And I did find things that I enjoyed about the profession, and I obviously enjoyed being with the cohort, and it was a cohort that you kind of spend years with, so you get to know them very well. So I enjoyed that part of it, but my university experience was very much one of not really caring about what I was doing and kind of almost really becoming passionate about other things in other arenas that I ended up doing, such as what we're doing right now, sort of in the media arts and writing and things of that nature. So, yeah, that's sort of my answer about my university experience. I read, a book about, Steve Jobs, and he was talking about the same thing where he, basically didn't care about what he was studying and was doing a lot of other stuff. And I understood that because, and maybe it made me a better pharmacist in the end. That's something we can definitely explore, but that was the way it was for me.
I talk about my journey, and we have so much in common, by the way, don't we? Because our journeys are very similar. This whole moving internationally, kind of falling into pharmacy instead of pursuing it out of choice. And obviously my story comes from, again, my parents having owned pharmacies for a couple of decades and being expected to go into a healthcare space, or a professional career pathway. In terms of my Asian background, it was definitely an expectation, and that was tough for me. And I do share that story with my students because I have seen quite a few students here in the UK, especially as they start university from the age of 17 or 18, which I think is so early to make decisions about the rest of your life when you are just about getting to grips with who you are. And I love the American system, actually, where you have the ability to do an undergraduate degree that's obviously outside of pharmacy, and you get to explore, especially in the first year, loads of different types of modules where you get credits towards your degree, but they're not specific to biology or chemistry or whatever it is that you're pursuing to get you into pharmacy in the first place. And that helped me to really understand a lot of things, and I got to explore the creative side of what I enjoy. But I do say to my students that even if you do fall into pharmacy out of maybe family pressure, which I think happens a lot more than we'd like, that there is always something for you within this profession because there is that much variety and option for you as a pharmacist, and you can pursue so many different avenues now. If you're interested in the clinical and patient-facing side, I mean, there's endless opportunities. If you like the business side, you could go into retail, or you can own your own business. If you like IT, if you like the digital world, if you like finance, if you like academia, if you like research, if you want to do a PhD, I mean, I could list so many more options, and you listen to my podcast and you'll see how much there is available for every single pharmacist out there. And there are so many things that I have not yet been able to include in this podcast that I still have to explore, which I'm very excited about. I'm curious to see what people are doing around the globe. So even though it was a pathway that you didn't necessarily want to go down, it's probably provided you with a lot of skill that has paved part of your journey and supported you to become who you are today, don't you think?
I think so. And it's really fascinating to me. I recently read an excellent book called Range by David Epstein. And Epstein argues in that book that in this rapidly changing world, the ability to draw on a wide range of experiences and knowledge, or what he calls being a generalist, can be often more valuable than being a specialist. You know, pharmacy is a specialist type of occupation, like most occupations are. But he suggests that if you cultivate a broad range of skills, if you're open to exploration, much like we did in college, that can lead to even greater innovation or better problem solving and more success uh, in whatever industry that you choose. So when I read that, I thought, well, yeah, I'm a generalist. That's what it is. You know, and I've become a generalist through no fault of my own, just by my experiences, and that may be a key to my success. And I'm wondering whether, having said that, do you consider yourself a generalist? And do you think that could be a reason why you've gone down the path that you've gone down as well?
I mean, now that you've said that, that's kind of opening my eyes a little bit to so many additional skills that I've learned along the way. And even now, as a podcaster, I am learning so much about marketing and sales and selling the podcast for people to listen to, not in a salesy way, and you know earning any income or asking people to pay for to watch or listen to this episode as an example, but you're selling the information that you're giving and trying to reach more people and have a bigger network and get your podcast out to more and more pharmacists or pharmacy students around the globe, and seeing its growth and its development. Like, for me, that's really exciting, but I'm learning along the way because it's not something that I have much experience with. But it's been really enjoyable to see, for example, what differences I put, like what different content I put out there and what people are enjoying. Like this week, I launched an episode about my life as an entrepreneur. And it's been such a success. Within 24 hours, I've had so many messages, so many emails, so many new contacts on LinkedIn, so many new followers on Instagram that are suddenly interested in the podcast because it's reaching new people because of the topic. And there are lots of pharmacists that are now wanting to look outside the box or leave the 9 to 5 or gain the confidence to try something of their own. And I'm really excited to see where this short form content that I've randomly created, what it's going to provide to my community. And that's been an exciting journey for me because you're genuinely progressing what your business or what your passion project looks like and seeing the growth and the change. I love that. And I wasn't ever expecting to utilize these skills, but I also then use these skills in my workplace because we're selling courses or international internships for pharmacists to come visit the UK to come and enjoy pediatrics at the hospital. You're using those same kind of salesmanship skills in that role and advertising and marketing on LinkedIn to try and draw people to the UK to come and see what my hospital has to offer in terms of pharmacy roles. So that's been a really transformative process for me and something that I've genuinely really enjoyed. And at the same time, I feel like I'm just growing as a human and not just as a pharmacist, but just growing in terms of all the experience. And maybe you're right, I am more of a generalist, but I'm also a specialist pediatric pharmacist. I'm both. Tricky.
It is, and I don't think you need to be one or the other. I think you could have flavors of both. Absolutely. And I feel the same way because it's not clear until you look back, right? It's only clear in retrospect how you've developed the skills that you currently have. We talked about our struggles and challenges growing up in foreign countries, and I think that's where my interest in communication started. You know, how do I communicate? How do I break down barriers? How can I get my message across and make sure I'm absorbing the message from this person so we can reach a meeting of the minds, and that we're now communicating on the same level, and communication really is the key to building relationships of any kind. And so that really came from my experiences of living in another country. Pharmacy, my pharmacy skills, uh, even though I didn't love being a pharmacist, but it taught me a lot of skills in terms of, for example, breaking down complex ideas into simple ones. When you're talking to somebody over the counter, explaining a new medication, you can't throw a lot of medical mumbo jumbo at them and they're not going to understand. And it's critical that they understand what they're taking, how it's impacting their health. So you need to take that, break it down, and communicate it in a way that's absorbable and understandable to your patients. And that now holds me in good stead when I'm in sales. And very much sales is doing that, taking all these concepts, breaking it down to here's your problem and here's how we're going to solve your problem. So look, I did obviously when I was going through it, I didn't think like, oh, well, this is going to hold me in great stead in 10 years when I'm doing sales. But looking back, you can really kind of draw, or as I can draw the line between some of those activities, and that at the time I didn't really understand how this was building skills in me to what I'm doing now.
Absolutely. Let me take you back to Australia and starting, I guess, your journey in community pharmacy, but also your journey as a business owner. What was that transition like for you from stepping from a role of working as a pharmacist to owning your own company? Because it's not something, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, it's not something that we learn as university students. So how did you gain the experience and the confidence and skill to step up and buy your own pharmacy?
Well, I think I always had the confidence. It's the skills that I was sadly falling short of, especially early in my career. So when I graduated pharmacy, I always wanted to own my own pharmacy. I think that's what appealed the most to me, was the business side of pharmacy. And that was the goal from the start. And so I kind of started working towards that and making connections and meeting people. And um, in the mid 2000s, I was still young in my 20s, and I met a couple guys who were looking for a partner. The pharmacy itself had been struggling, but you have that confidence of youth, right? You think, I can turn this thing around, no problem. Right? Just I need to get in, I need to work it, I need to, you know, connect with my patients, and it'll be fine. And it wasn't. And the big lesson that came out of that was environment is critically important. You hear about when someone's buying a house, it's location, location, location. And it's very similar in business. If you could have the best idea, you could have a great team, but if the environmental conditions, the economic conditions aren't winds at your back, if they're more headwinds, you're going to struggle. You're just going to struggle, and it's very rare for any sort of business to rise above that. They're the sort of the unicorns that succeed no matter what. But by and large, you are going to be impacted by a whole host of things that you just cannot control. You control what you can control, but everything else, it's a lot of luck, frankly. And so that's something that I didn't have a good appreciation of when I first started. I thought by will and skill alone, I could get this business turned in the right direction. And after a couple of years, I realized, well, no, actually, I can't. And maybe the will was definitely there. Maybe the skill was also not quite where it needed to be at that stage. But it didn't diminish my passion for business. And talking about the skills that you learn, I learned how to run a team. I learned how to manage a P&L. I learned what cash flow was, and it got me interested in all those business aspects, which eventually, when I went out and co-founded a pharmacy group and eventually founded my startup, I now had all those skills that I can then take with me, and all those mistakes I made, that I can learn from. And of course, there's new mistakes to be made in my new roles, but it definitely held me in good stead for the future.
There is a fear around failure, which you didn't have maybe in the early days of your career, being young and energetic and ready to go and fight for the passion as a business owner. And you had positive manifestations and wishful thinking that you could turn everything around, which is amazing, by the way. There's no way I would have been able to do that in my early 20s. There's no way I would have felt comfortable. Even thinking about it now, it just feels like so much money on top of me that you have to manage and keep control of, and that just scares the bejesus out of me. Like, there's no way I'd follow that pathway right now, because I definitely am not maybe financially savvy, might be tech savvy, but not financially savvy. I don't have that business mindset. And it's something that I definitely want to improve on, and something that Pharmacist Diaries is helping me to understand, because I'm now at the point where, of course, this is a passion project that will eventually turn into a business, or it is turning into a business. It's just navigating how that's going to happen. And there are definitely fears and things that I'm doing outside of my comfort zone, but with low risk, while that feels like a very high risk kind of change and a strategy that one I definitely would find really hard to cope with. So go you for kind of like, stepping up. So, confidently and courageously, and trying something outside of your comfort zone, and trying to hone in on those skills and what you enjoyed from pharmacy and making it work for you. And I think that you have to learn from mistakes in life and in business and in your professional career, and you will become a better professional and a human from learning those mistakes. And everyone goes through challenges in their personal journeys. And I think that's probably made you a stronger, more resilient, and better businessman at the end of the day. I am really curious to know, I guess, after owning pharmacies, working as a community pharmacist in Australia, what made you feel the need to then move back to the US?
Well, first of all, I'll say, Anisha, you can go and create a business and manage a big team. I'm sure you can. And it took me a while, just going back a little bit, to think about success versus failure, because my first business was a failure in every which way. I lost a lot of money. I ended up having basically to walk away from the business. And obviously it impacts you. You get upset, you get depressed, you start thinking, well, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm just not a business person. Maybe I'm just not the sort of person who can do this. Um, so I thought very deeply about that, and I looked at the pharmacy industry in Australia, which was the industry that I was really familiar with, and really looked carefully at the industry. So I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, if you'll allow me. Have you heard of a podcast called How I Built This?
No, tell me more.
So in this is a podcast where the host interviews entrepreneurs and startup CEOs and asks them to tell their story, basically, kind of like what we're doing here. But he always ends with the same question, which is, do you think your success is mostly due to luck or your own hard work and ingenuity, basically your own genius? And the answers really vary, right? But I always wondered if we could poll pharmacy owners, particularly in Australia, with the same question, and those who own multiple pharmacies, where they would land on that spectrum. And I've owned a number of pharmacies now in Australia. I've met a lot of pharmacy owners, and my guess is they would land very much towards the I was a genius end of the spectrum. But having said that, if you look at the environmental conditions in the pharmacy profession in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, before a lot of the warehouse pharmacies and a lot of the changes in regulation, you're looking at an environment where there was restricted ownership, sky high margins, little or no competition, right? It kind of reminds me of that Simpsons episode where Homer kind of leaves his post at the nuclear power plant and they replace him with a chicken pecking at the controls, right? I'm not saying that the pharmacy owners can be replaced by chickens, but I'm not saying that either. But I think the idea here is, if you think you're a genius, it doesn't give you a lot of reasons to change your thinking. And you don't really reflect back on how you got where you got to. And I think this is part of the reason why innovation is kind of lagging in the pharmacy industry, where you have this static ownership class with a lot of the money who also think they got there because of their incredible business acumen. And that results in a lack of drive to work in the past. So I'm going to bring that back around to your question, which is, I kind of felt I'd reached a stage where I couldn't really go much further in terms of innovation, in terms of trying to take my businesses where I wanted to go. And that might have been a lack of imagination on my part, but I just felt like I really needed an environment where I felt more free to have these crazy ideas and run with them. And really, America's kind of the place where it's sold. That's the place to be for it, which is the reason why I decided to sell out, come back, really start again from scratch. Because you come to the States, you don't have. I mean, unlike you have a degree from a U.S. college. I don't. I have degrees from Australian colleges. So you have to sell yourself again. You have to kind of start at the bottom, which also appealed to me. Could I build myself up again? I didn't want to get my pharmacy license here to practice. I did end up in the pharmacy industry anyway, in a corporate setting, but I wanted to see if I could build myself up regardless of that. So it's that challenge that really drew me, and that ability to maybe go ahead and innovate and start things, which I felt I'd probably reached a ceiling in my old role in Australia. Not to say anything about, I still believe there's so many great innovators, especially in the pharmacy industry in Australia. People really passionate about using technology to enhance the patient experience, but they're just kind of stuck in an environment where up until now it's slowly shifting towards where it's becoming more, uh, easier anyway to run with these types of innovations, these new ideas. But it's taken a long time.
That's really interesting. I like that you've kind of shared that element of your journey, that you did feel limited to some extent. And when I lived in the UAE, I also felt like you were very limited because you had to fit in line with the legal aspects of what you were allowed to do, and what fit under your very specific pharmacist license. I don't know exactly how this podcast would kind of run living in another country and what freedoms I would have with building a business, because you would need to have all sorts of visas and develop sponsorships, and in order to set things up from a financial point of view. And there are so many hurdles and challenges around that when you live in another country. And you're right, America sells itself from the point of view of freedom and being able to have your own freedom of speech, your freedom when it comes to your thought processes and ideas. So I can see why you were intrigued by moving back to your home country, also somewhere where you were raised and you felt comfortable. It was your home at the end of the day. And I had that very similar sort of thought process from my point of view. I was still a student then, but in terms of comfort, I was really excited about going back home and just transitioning back to what I know and what I miss so much about living in the UK. And I lived in the US for just under a decade, but I never ever felt truly at home there. I did feel like a foreigner, so I was really happy to sort of leave. And even living in the UAE, because you live under a visa and specific rules and regulations with regards to sponsorship and having a job and accommodation, you can only, mainly you would rent from other people and under very strict laws and rules, and it never felt like home, and was another reason why I also felt like I wanted to move back to the UK again, because you just look for that kind of comfort from your home country. It's hard to explain, and kind of detail and pinpoint those exact feelings. But home is home. Home is just, for me, it's just like, okay, comfort. Like, I know I don't know, there's something about it that just sits right with me. But at the same time, when I'm home, I'm always craving to be somewhere else. It's like a total catch-22. Even to this day, like I said to my husband, like, how many years are we going to stay in the UK? I'm craving the next adventure. But then when I'm on the adventure, I think what I'll need to do is have a mindset shift. Is that I think in the past I was always looking 2 steps ahead or 3 steps ahead. And I have become a lot more accustomed to living in the present moment and enjoying what I have today. And that mindset shift has taken me many years to really hone in on it and understand that today is the day that you enjoy. The life you have now is the one that you enjoy, and stop wishing and hoping for other things. I definitely, of course, there's a lot of value in manifesting positive thoughts or manifesting what it is that you want to achieve or the vision that you might have for the future. I totally agree with that. But sometimes when you live in another country, you're always looking at what else can I do to achieve that next goal or that next promotion. And you get wound up by that societal pressure to just continue to improve rather than just enjoying where you are today. I had this conversation with my 6-year-old, but hers is more around what she wants to buy. And I had to really sit down and think, how do I explain to a 6-year-old about being materialistic and enjoying company with family, or spending time with your mum cooking dinner, or playing with your baby brother, or reading in bed and snuggling up with your dad, over buying a new scooter. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to explain that concept because she's looking at me like, I can tell she's really confused, but it is something that I've learned the hard way from just life experience that I'm now trying to explain to a small human, and it's actually really a difficult concept for them to understand. And she gets pocket money for doing chores. Kids have debit cards now. She's 6 years old, and my dad bought her this little debit card, which I have not let her use in a shop, but I can put money onto it. And if she wanted to take it into a shop, she could buy herself something. And in her mind, she's like, look, I'm earning money and I should be able to spend it. But then in her mind, she's just buying things to make her happy. I know we're so going off the topic of pharmacy right now, but it's really hard to help her to understand that you don't need things to be happy. And it's a concept in my life that's taken me many years to understand. So I'm now hoping that as a parent, I can help her to understand what this means for her and guide her along the way of enjoying where we're at today and not constantly thinking about what you want tomorrow, is my point. But it is hard, right? It's difficult. There's just so much going on with everything on the online world and what society expects of you and what you should be doing instead of just doing what you want to do and being who you want to be. And living in different countries has really opened my eyes to that, and being immersed in a culture where you are constantly buying the next house, which is slightly bigger, or the next car that comes on the market, or the new iPhone that comes out, instead of just enjoying what you have. It's a difficult concept. But within pharmacy, when you look at technology and innovation and things that are improving what pharmacy has to offer, now we're getting back on track because I took us totally sidetracked there. What are your thoughts on how innovation and technology is changing for pharmacy? And from your experience, how is this developing within community pharmacy?
Well, first, I want to comment a little bit about what you said because I find it endlessly fascinating. And you're right, there's a weird and wonderful kind of dichotomy that kind of comes out of nowhere in a sense because for us being people who kind of grew up in another country, like you said, home is home and home has a special feeling. It's very hard to explain to people who have been home their whole lives. But at the same time, because we know what's out there, we have this urge to explore and to be somewhere else, even though we can really appreciate, I think, at a higher level what home is like. And my wife keeps, she's tired of hearing me say, every couple of weeks I'll say, why don't we go live in Europe, right? Or why don't we just go live in the Middle East for a while? And she's like, oh, this again. So, but it's because you understand, you know what it's like to be out there and experience those things, and it changes you in various ways. Like you were saying, in terms of actual physical stuff is a little bit less meaningful because when you're moving, you can't take a lot of stuff with you. It's only going to be a couple of things that are truly meaningful that you can take with you from place to place. Whereas people who kind of are more static, their stuff, surrounded by their stuff, it's a lot more meaningful for them. And it's hard to tell somebody, or to in your case, give lessons to your daughter about the meaning of stuff when, that's a big part of themselves and their life is the stuff they have around them, unless they decide to like get rid of all their stuff and move, in which case, I didn't need that stuff anyway. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that because I think it's really fascinating and very interesting. And I promise I'll get to your question, about which I may not remember now, but I wanted to make sure that we talked a little about that because I think it really formulates the type of person you are, the type of pharmacist that you become. And I'm talking about innovation. So I think that's where, again, if I can connect the dots, this kind of real interest in innovation is coming from, because You kind of see how other things are done in other countries. How do I bring this here? This is really interesting in Abu Dhabi or Dubai or the U.S. or U.K. and Australia. How can we meld this together? Because it's not, I don't see it here where I'm working. So, I think in terms of innovation, and particularly technology, there needs to be, the first thing we need to do is there needs to be a paradigm shift in thinking, right? And especially in the pharmacy sector, where we need to start putting technology in the center of all we do. Because right now, we kind of think of tech in pharmacy as ancillary to the core business of pharmacy. And I think that should change. The first questions that pharmacists need to ask themselves is, what technology can I use to make this process better, or this system more efficient, or allow me to provide a better patient experience? I think it really is the key to surviving and thriving in the next kind of 20, 50, 100 years. So I think that paradigm shift is kind of the very first step in using technology and innovating in our sector. And I think the other part of that, the other side of that coin, is really focusing in on patient-centered tech solutions. We want to deliver holistic healthcare to our patients. That's our ultimate aim. And in order to do that, we really need to know our customers, really know our patients at a level which to this point we haven't, because for most pharmacists in community pharmacy, they see their patient once a month, twice a month, maybe once a week. If they have a lot of medications, and talk to them. How's it going? How you feeling? Here's your medication. See you later, right? But do we know if they've missed a doctor's appointment? Do we know if their dosage has changed, if they haven't filled a new prescription? Do we know about their mental health and their well-being? The only way we can get this information is through regular, constant, detailed communication with our patients. Seeing them once or twice a month is not going to cut it. So if we're going to create that level of relationship, that level of insight in our patients, we need to leverage technology and adapt new platforms. And that's where the competitive advantage is. So I'll kind of stop there and get your thoughts on all that.
Technology is expanding at a rate that is really difficult to keep up with, but in a very exciting way. And from the point of view of working as a hospital pharmacist at the moment, I completely agree that we need to leverage what we've got, but make it efficient. And how my hospital has been working, and this is no insult to Guy's and St. Thomas's at the moment, which is where I work, but we have to utilize multiple apps to support the journey of the pharmacist, of the patient. Sorry. Yeah. So we've got one app that we open to look at blood results, one app to open to look at the doctor's notes, one app to look at prescriptions and prescribe medications and administer them. Another app to, look at, what else do we have? Yeah, one app for critical care, which has kind of an all-in-one platform, while all the other wards are using something else. And it just feels like the amount of usernames and passwords that I need to keep up with can be really overwhelming. When COVID hit and we all went on to Teams and Zoom and Google Meet, that just meant a whole bunch of new applications that we had to get used to. And though they have provided an incredible amount of efficiency, where you're not having to travel to meet people for meetings or go across the other side of London just to go to another hospital to have a conversation with someone, you're obviously able to meet virtually, which is saving you so much time and making life so much more efficient. Sometimes we get a little bit too app happy and we keep purchasing more and more and more without realizing the impact on the efficiency of the healthcare professional. I feel like at times in my role that when we used to have drug charts that were based on paper and everything used to be at the end of the patient's bedside, life was so much easier for me to do my job and so much quicker for me to see so many more patients. And when I look at what young pharmacists have to go through now, the ones who are coming out of university and stepping into these electronic prescribing and very tech savvy roles, they are seeing 20 to 30 patients, while when we were back on paper, the expectation was that I would see 60 to 90 patients. And as we have evolved, we've seen a lot of issues with the number of applications we need to work with in order to do the same job. And that's been really frustrating for me. I think that sometimes in the role of the pharmacist and the pharmacy department, we haven't utilized apps in the most positive way from the point of view of tasks that need to be done or projects that need to be managed. So Asana or Trello or apps that help with project management, we are relying on email to communicate with each other and blocking each other's inboxes with so much communication that could be taken offline. So you kind of have, again, it's a catch-22 situation. You're utilizing apps to make life more efficient and easy, and you can prescribe remotely, you can work from home, you can meet people virtually on Teams or on Zoom, but at the same time, you're also not utilizing apps in the most efficient way, and things are taking so much longer for you to actually get processes done. So again, it's all about the journey and making progress. And I really like seeing how the changes are developing with time. And I'm not expecting a perfect process. And my hospital is actually going through the process of now buying Epic. So we're utilizing Epic instead of the 8 or 9 applications we currently open to manage our patient. And I'm genuinely really looking forward to this transition because everything is under one platform. And finally, the hospital have realized that we could be so much more efficient and safe and work enjoyably in this online platform rather than the kind of very clunky way of working that we've had in the past. I've also seen in my role at the Evelina how I've enjoyed the curiosity of tech and technology from the point of view of project management and implementing Asana within my team and seeing the transformation of how we're managing projects and managing our formulary to grow what we've been doing, manage tasks, prove our worth when it comes to the number of new drugs that have come onto the market and then go onto our formulary, or the number of updates we're making in pediatrics with regards to drugs that we are updating depending on the evidence that's available. The number of pharmacists that we're collaborating with in other hospitals who are now on Asana, but they work in pediatrics, so they are working on specific drug applications that support the specialist areas they have. So we have another hospital in London who specializes in liver transplants, so anything liver related they would do. We have another hospital that's a respiratory specialist hospital who support with all the development of drugs related to respiratory conditions, while we're a renal transplant center. We also cover metabolic disease and really complex neurology conditions. We have an amazing neonatal unit and pediatric ICU. So we have a lot of pharmacists with expertise to support drugs that manage those conditions. But collaboratively, across an amazing application, we are making massive changes for our patients, which has been so exciting. And over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen some huge developments in our area and basically providing information not only for ourselves and within the pharmacy, for doctors who are prescribing within the hospital, but also doctors who are in primary care, so our GPs who aren't so familiar with the drugs that we use, the dosages that we use, the unlicensed formulations, the specials we have to buy, the imports that we purchase, and putting all of that onto one platform and allowing people to then provide the best patient care that possibly can exist for our cohort. So I love the transformation that's happening with technology, and I love how we can utilize technology to showcase what we're doing. But I'm also very well aware that we're never like in a perfect situation, and we're always growing and learning. And I think accepting that makes life a lot easier, because I was getting really frustrated when I first joined this company that why are we using so many apps? Like, this is really slowing me down and I'm not working efficiently. It's taking me 20 minutes to see a patient versus the 5 if we were still on paper. Like, how is this improving the process? And that really like got me down. But instead I switched my mindset in this situation that, okay, we've got a problem. What's in my control and what's not in my control? And what can I do to support the development of using technology to improve the efficiency for our team and the impact that we have on our patients?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of one of the key issues in healthcare, which is this diffracted information ecosystem, interoperability. There's so many apps, there's so many platforms that it becomes really difficult, very unwieldy. And you think all these efficiencies that you should have created kind of not happening because you have to wade through all this. But I'll tell you what, I think that's going to be solved. And you kind of see that happening already in what you're doing. And AI is going to be part of that. I think we're going to be able to get to a point where we have, the information we need to really take care of the patient at our fingertips in one place. But I'll tell you what, there's a bigger problem because we're going to get there with technology, and we, hear a lot about the AI revolution. And it's going to help out. But the bigger problem in my eyes is once we have all that information, how are we then communicating that to our patients? And you can't do that with AI yet. I mean, I guess you can. You can put a screen in front of somebody, and ChatGPT can kind of just read out what they have. But that we all know that's not going to be good enough for patient care. So this is something that I thought a lot about. And it's one of the reasons why I started Audirie, because we thought about their AI can only take us so far. We need that human intervention, and really that human intervention comes in taking all this information that we've collected and then translating it, much like when I was back in pharmacy, into a way or into some sort of capability to really take care of the patient, have them understand where they are in their healthcare journey. And it's interesting because I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning of our conversation where we talked about being immersed in a different culture. The way you actually learn anything, and the reason why we picked up some of the traits we did, is because of that immersive skill building. And that's kind of where we went with our product, in that we need to immerse somebody in a particular scenario, or else you're just not going to get better. I mean, think about, a perfect example that everyone can relate to is learning a new language, right? Like, everyone's tried to learn a new language at some point, and nobody learns a new language off an app. Or, ChatGPT can try and teach you a new language. You might get to a certain level and, have a few words and phrases, but how are you really going to learn a language? You need to be immersed in it. You need to go to that country. You need to live there or be there for a while. That's how you learn. So the way we're going to learn how to translate all this technology in a way that really elevates patient care is through communication, and by, again, leveraging technology and AI to create these immersive experiences where, in our case, pharmacy interns and pharmacy assistants can practice counseling with an avatar that answers questions like a real patient. Again, due to this AI integration, and that ability then to have this dynamic, completely immersive interaction elevates the way they communicate. So when they're out in the real world and they have all this information and data that need to relate to patients, they now have the tools to be able to do that. Tools that we got from our personal experiences, but they haven't built.
That's really exciting. Tell me more about the business and how it has grown from the startup to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like most startups, they start off with one idea and you end up in a totally different place from where you started. So my original idea was coming out of my doing Toastmasters, and I'm not sure. Do you have Toastmasters in the UK? It's like a
Yeah.
public speaking, yeah. So that it's a public speaking kind of group, or it's an organization, and they have local chapters where people can come together and practice their public speaking. But you kind of have to do it in person. It's hard to get out and do something on a regular basis. And I couldn't find any other digital option or anything that was a little bit more was a bit easier for me to do. So the original idea was, how can we democratize communication coaching and skill building, make it accessible to everyone 24/7, be able to give objective feedback to people when they're, for their public speaking and at a price which people can afford. So that was our first iteration of our product. And, we created a couple of products that help with public speaking. We created a virtual interview prep product. So if you're going for a virtual interview, you can use our product to kind of prep for that and go through some mock questions. We created our own communication profile. So our users would go through an assessment. It would build a communication profile for you based on our framework to kind of tell you the kind of communicator you are, the kind of ways that people respond to you in your personal communication style. So, we kind of did all that, but we weren't in healthcare at all. And which is funny considering my healthcare background. We never considered it for a healthcare case until I was actually I was a guest on this on my podcast, which I do now, and I was talking about Audirie, and I was contacted by a fellow by the name of Serge Singh, and Serge owned a company which provided locum services for pharmacists in Australia called Locumate, and he asked me, "Hey, have you ever considered launching Audirie for the Australian pharmacy industry?" And having come from the Australian pharmacy industry, of course, my answer was no, not at all. Never thought about it. But both Serge and his wife, Kavi, who's also a pharmacist, immediately saw a use case. So we partnered with them to create this immersive skill building AI powered platform, which now we use to train pharmacy assistants and pharmacy interns on counseling. So different types of counseling scenarios that, unless you're working, you're never going to interact with, right? I'm sure you can think of dozens of different scenarios where, that you experienced working that it never even came up in college, right? Of how do I, what do I do here? Like, for example, if somebody comes in with a prescription for oxycodone, right? And you can tell that the prescription is forged. Well, they don't teach you what to do in school and how to handle that situation in a pharmacy, in real time. But now we have the tools where we could simulate that scenario. It's not going to be 100% lifelike, but it'll be just enough so that when the student, is interacting with the person in real life, at least they have some sort of context. They build a skill set where they now can talk through the situation and they know what to do. And it's not just they know what to do academically; they've actually been through it a couple of times before, at least virtually, and so they feel a little more confident handling that. So multiply that scenario by hundreds of different types of scenarios that you'll never read about, in university, and that's kind of what we're trying to do.
I need to see a demo of this immediately. This is so exciting. This would be amazing for my students at the university. We have to take this offline now, Michael.
Yeah,
This is
we'll
it.
talk. We'll talk.
So are you using it only in Australia at the moment, or are you also using it in the US as well?
Only in Australia at the moment. We are talking to pharmacy organizations in the US right now. It's fairly new technology. I mean, about a year and a half ago, it wasn't even possible to do what we're doing. So it's brand new, cutting edge technology that everyone's still trying to wrap their head around in terms of how they can use this and what they can do with it. So early days yet, but it's obviously a huge emerging field, and we're super excited about what we can do with it.
Oh, I love it. There's so many exciting things going on. Recently, I found out about the NHS, so our National Health Service in the UK. There's I think multiple pharmacy departments are using it, but you can scan a QR code on the medication that you receive as a patient on your phone or computer. And it will take you to a website that will get a sort of patient information leaflet, but in multiple languages. And I believe it's not just reading the content in another language, but it's video or audio. that comes up. So I'm sure that that will develop into some sort of avatar or AI system that allows you to actually receive information, or you'll be able to talk to whoever it is on the other end virtually about the medication that it is you're taking and any other questions. And it is really exciting to see how innovation is changing, and I can't wait to hear more about the development of this business and how things are going. This conversation has been nothing like what I expected, but in a really exciting way. So much about both of our journeys with regards to who we are today, living internationally, constantly exploring kind of the adventure of living in different countries. I love that you've been speaking to your wife about, oh, yeah, shall we live in Europe or go to the Middle East? This is me. I'm like the female version of you, constantly thinking about, the next adventure and where you want to live. It's just, I guess it's ingrained in us as people who have moved around, especially from a young age. And it is really exciting to learn about new cultures and immerse yourself in new environments. But yeah, innovation is something we all have to get used to. It's sticking around, and we got to kind of keep up to date with what's happening and enjoy the process. But thank you so much for your time and your energy on tonight's podcast and sharing your journey. I am sure everyone will really enjoy hearing your story.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.